Dear students, welcome to today's instructional video with the topic Design Principles for Sustainable Urban Environments. My name is Daniel Lang.
And my name is Beatrice John. Dealing with the topic on urban planning and design principles, we like to start with a distinguished person in this field of expertise. Jane Jacobs was a journalist, an author, an activist, and she died in 2006, but influenced with her work the field of urban studies. Her first book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, is her most influential one and deals with the urban planning and policies during the 1950s. Her critique is directed towards several predominant concepts that she summarized under the term Radiant Garden City Beautiful. She challenged points in this concept regarding the separation of urban functions, concepts of population density and diversity. She also addresses how the planning practice works in a hierarchical top-down process. How cities really work, in her opinion, is only experienced by observation.
When we follow Jane Jacobs' advice to observe the city, we would notice that it is virtually impossible to capture the one single model of a city. However, when we look at basic functions of cities, we can differentiate at least 5 basic functions. People come to cities to work. If they come there to work, they need to reside in the cities. The people living in the cities need to be nourished. People need to be transported from one place in a city where they live to another place where they work. And finally, there is a need for communication in the city. Well, as I said, these can mainly be seen as basic functions of a city, which could be expanded to further functions like aesthetics or cultural functions in a city. But these functions help to structure or better understand basic mechanisms in cities.
There are different levels where strategic urban design is applied. On a microscopic scale, we talk about the individual household or building. Yet urban design interventions need to consider more than monuments in single spaces or individual buildings. The interrelations with higher macroscopic levels are needed to deal overall with the advantages and disadvantages of a city. As you can see, on the next level, urban design deals with neighborhoods, then districts, communities. They are severable towards the lower and higher scale and show their own identity. They distinguish themselves as also regarding inhabitants, their lifestyles, etc. And design changes have transformational effects on these sociological structures. For example, Jane Jacobs fought strongly against the transformation of her own community, Greenwich Village, and succeeded. The urban planning in the 1950s aimed at changing the local small business economy, the composition and diversity of inhabitants, and the building layout. Then one level up on the conglomeration of several districts, they form a city. Far often on this level lays the power of decision about general citywide strategies and urban design. General master plans are being developed here. Urban planning and design in this level is highly connected to political decisions. On the highest scale, several cities are embedded within a region. Urban planning and design aims at this level to improve functional relationships with the hinterland. Further, when we talk about designing or redesigning a city, looking into the future is demanded and goals are required that lead the planning process or the transformation of a city into a desired target state. The question is then, what role is sustainability playing within this process? Urban planning has dealt with aspects of sustainability before, without being tagged as sustainable development. Sound urban planning has addressed ecological principles, participatory planning, and has considered social impacts on urban form. Yet the rise of the concept of sustainability sparked the demand and discussion that led eventually to the development of several design principles on forms of urban settlements that seek to contribute to sustainability also on different spatial scales, those we just presented on the slides earlier. So what constitutes distinctive and desired urban forms and patterns that follow sustainability design principles. Roughly, we have chosen for this presentation seven design concepts of urban form. You see on the left side of the slide. Just to illustrate one or two, for example, compactness is an element that deals with containment of sprawl in general. The element of diversity, on the other hand, represents the idea of heterogeneous urban patterns, such as housing types, household sizes, or age of the inhabitants, to attract diverse residents. It deals with the social and cultural context of urban form. Diversity is a multidimensional factor and interrelates to densities and mixed land uses. Yet the combination and elaboration of these elements vary and produce a number of distinguished sustainable urban forms. Among them, there is neo-traditional development that focuses on urban sprawl and inner-city decline to rebuild neighborhoods and cities. It incorporates a high diversity and a level of mixed land use and a rather moderate density and compactness. For example, the design principles of the new urbanism movement could be counted into this category. They are significantly influenced by Jane Jacobs' ideas. Then there are urban forms that can be described with the term of urban containment, and deals foremost with the syndrome of urban sprawl and employs a variety of containment policies to push and pull the urban form into a desired geographical one. They consider passive solar design and greening on a rather lower scale, and the other elements are represented moderate. Design principles of smart growth programs are those that fall into this category. Yet, taking general sustainability criteria into account, a question remains: how far are these guiding principles going? And which of the design principles produce urban forms that are the most sustainable ones?
This leads us to the question, how can we check the sustainability of a city, or more general, how can we assess sustainability or sustainable development? Let me use a concept of Gibson introduced in 2006. According to Gibson, when we want to assess sustainability, we first have to define, or can define, generic core. Following Gibson, a first step when assessing sustainability is that we can define a core set of generic criteria related to sustainability that stress the requirements for improvement in this concrete area. Gibson derived these generic core criteria based on his experience and on a large review of different sustainability assessment approaches. Though Gibson argues that this is not sufficient and it does not suffice to really define the sustainability of a certain system we are looking at. We need these generic criteria and then translate them to context-dependent Following Gibson. But Gibson argues that these generic core criteria do not suffice to really assess the sustainability of a concrete system. For so doing, we need to take the generic criteria and to translate them into context-dependent criteria that include location-specific conditions that we really need to assess the specific system. Furthermore, it is important to recognize the interdependencies among the criteria and consider them in a comprehensive agenda to reinforce overall positive effects. That means it is not the case that the different criteria can be assessed separately, but it is important to strongly look at the interdependencies of these different criteria. Finally, to support decision makers, we need to formulate trade-off rules, and they are also defined in the in the Gibson paper. That means we need to formulate rules. What happens if a certain system performs very well with regards to a specific criteria and very poorly with regards to another criteria? How do we deal with these trade-offs between the different criteria? And additionally, we also need process rules. How do we really organize processes for the sustainability assessment? And how can we include different perspectives, different preferences into these sustainability assessments?
This is the point where we come to this week's reading assignments. We prepared a bunch of literature for you that elaborates some of the preceding points in this video. First, we want you to read Stefan Lehmann's Principles of Green Urbanism. It is a collection of 10 principles that aim to address sustainable urban planning. Also, we want you to have a look onto the website of Bioregional. Bioregional is a social enterprise that develops and guides implementation processes to so-called One Planet communities. You will find there also, on the one hand, the framework, and according to this framework, implemented examples. Then the TED Talk we suggest you is by Kent Larson. He is part of the MIT School of Architecture and Planning, and in his video he presents design ideas and technology with regards to density issues in cities. The last point on the reading list is Gibson's paper on sustainability assessments that provides you, especially with the list of the generic core criteria for sustainability assessments.
What should you focus on when reading, looking, listening to these different sources? For guiding you to through these different sources, we want to provide you with 3 different guiding questions that kind of relate first more to the contents of the different papers. Then in a second, with regards to the second question, we want you to compare the different sources. And finally, we want you to transfer the insights you gain during the process of reading the different sources to your concrete context in Lüneburg or Phoenix. That means the first guiding question is, what are the key principles that should guide sustainable urban designs according to the texts? The second question is that you should compare the different approaches of the design principles / generic core criteria. How similar, different are they? Which sustainability aspects do they include? Or how do they deal with sustainability concepts? And finally, as I already said, it is about the application of the design principles of the different texts to concrete projects, examples you know from Lüneburg or Phoenix. Let us wrap up this short introductional video.
First, we gave you an introduction to Jane Jacobs and her ideas about planning.
Second, it was about the identification of what is being planned.
And then we showed you on what levels planning is conducted.
As another point, we try to emphasize elements of urban design principles.
And the last point was sustainability assessments and how to check for progress in sustainability development status.
Well, we wish you all the best and lots of fun when reading the different sources and trying to deal with criteria for sustainable urban design.
Well, and thank you for listening and watching.
Bye-bye.